Hello. Thanks to Natasha, Kathleen, and Andreas for the invitation to present a short video talk at Mapping for Change. I wish I could be there with all of you. My name is Catherine D'Ignazio, and I'm an assistant professor of urban science and planning at MIT. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about feminist data visualization and data feminism. So, excuse me while I start my slideshow. So, it's probably not a surprise to know that I have a book coming out together with Lauren F. Klein in March 2020. It's called Data Feminism. But it didn't start as data feminism. First, we started writing about feminist data visualization. And we came to it in slightly different paths. But for me, I came out of being a student at the MIT Media Lab around the 2012, 2014 timeframe, where there was a huge amount of hype around big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, as there continues to be now. And I was really struck, having come up in the counter mapping and psychogeography, counter cartography worlds, that there were not sort of more systematic pushbacks against the positivism around data, against some of the even sort of basic assumptions that were being made at the time, such as things like, data sets represent somehow facts in spreadsheet form, which of course we know that they do not. And that was what originally led Lauren and I to write our piece for IEEE Viz called Feminist Data Visualization. But then as we reflected on that, a visualization is an output of a process, just as a map is an output of a whole process where you have asked some questions and you have gathered data and you have analyzed it and you've chosen how to display it. And we thought very strongly that, you can't have a feminist data visualization without looking back across the entire process, across the whole pipeline. And so that's sort of how we expanded the project in a way backwards, to really think about the question of what might a feminist data science look like. And so that's really the question that the book tries to answer, is that are there ways to both use and possibly to refuse data that don't uphold structural oppression? Is there any hope, basically, for data? And then what needs to change about our current practices to get there? And so a lot of what we did is look across fields like human-computer interaction, feminist approaches to GIS and cartography. There's feminist economics. There's the whole range of really amazing feminist thought. We didn't look at all of it, I'm very sure. But to think about how do we draw those thinkers in and leverage their thinking and their actions in this new era that's not new of data and computation. So that's just a very short intro to sort of how we arrived at the project. I don't have time to go into these, but what we do in the book is we set out 7 principles of data feminism. And the 2 that I just want to talk about a brief example of today are some of the most important ones. And so the first 2, we have 2 chapters devoted to power. The first chapter is about examining power. How do we use data science, mapping, quantitative tools to examine power? And then how do we use those same tools to challenge power? And then I also want to back up and say one of the reasons, or one of the things that feminism, and specifically a feminist approach, brings that I think is useful for mapping, for data science and visualization, is this penchant for thinking about power critically, but then also for asking very important questions. Who questions? So data science for whom? Data science about whom? With whose values and whose interests? These are the kinds of questions that feminism is really good at asking. And it turns out these are the kind of questions that we need to ask of our maps and our data visualizations, both as we make them and when we encounter made ones in the world. So here we have an example of a redlining map, which Probably most of you are familiar with these. But this is the kind of map that results when only dominant groups are empowered to work with data. So when we only have the richest, malest, most elite, whitest folks at the top working with these high-tech tools, this is the kind of thing that we end up with. So this is the map of 1940s Detroit, made by the Detroit Chamber of Commerce. You can see their members pictured here, as well as the Federal Home Loan Bank Board. And so this was a map that rates neighborhoods for risk. So the red neighborhoods in the map are deemed high risk, so not worth making a loan to. And all of Detroit's black neighborhoods from 1940, of course, fall into that red area on the map. But so these are the kind of maps made by people in power under the guise of reason and objectivity. But underneath that mask are these unquestioned and completely not objective values of profit-seeking and securing white wealth. So we all think these are bad maps today, right? But I think it's really important to look back at them and think about how they represent the big data sorting techniques of their time. So first, they were very high-tech. They used the most advanced technologies. Second, they were scalable solutions to the quote-unquote problem, right? The problem of who do we make a loan to. So they were deployed across the nation. This was federal. And they ensured that wealth remained attached to the racial category of whiteness. And then third, their results were presented in clear, crisp, gridded views from above. They have the appearance of objectivity, and they don't even hint at the way that their data was actually collected. Basically, like white guy bureaucrats walked around neighborhoods with little forms, making just handmade marks on forms and rating neighborhoods on like how clean they were, how much trash they saw on the street, and how many ethnic people they saw walking around and heard speaking different languages and so on. So very sort of unscientific. It's sort of through the eyes of the white male bureaucrat kind of data collection. So these maps weaponize technology, and they weaponize objectivity and the visual conventions of objectivity in the service of preserving the status quo. So they're what Ruha Benjamin would call imagined objectivity. So again, this is why I put the picture of the guys here, because it's really important to think about who is behind this map, whose identities, whose perspectives are represented by this map, who did the work. These dudes did the work. But so what happens when people and communities do their own analysis and make their own maps? In 1970, the Detroit Geographic Expedition and Institute released their own provocative map. And I just want to do a shout out to Cindy Katz if she's there in the audience. Hello, Cindy. She knows and has written much about this project. And so the map, released by Gwendolyn Warren and the Detroit Geographical Expedition, was titled "Where Commuters Run Over Black Children on the Point's Downtown Track." So it really starkly shows where many black children were killed. But just even gathering the data that the community already knew to be true posed a really difficult problem. And Gwendolyn Warren describes in the report how she developed relationships with, quote, political people in order to use them as a means of getting information from the police department in order to find out exactly what time, where, how, and who killed each child. In the book, in Data Feminism, we talk a lot about this lack of data, missing data, data silences. It turns out that there are many things, often having to do with women, with children, with families, with people of color, with marginalized groups, with trans people, that we just simply do not care about. It's not profitable enough to collect data to sort of measure these kind of phenomena. But so the reason it ends up being collected and published was because of this unlikely educational collaboration formed between Black youth, led by Gwendolyn Warren, and white male academic geographers who provided technical support to the community to do their own mapping. And so this is one of these cases of using data, in this case data collection and also its analysis and presentation, to challenge power. Even just the act of collecting counter data, of filling in some of those data silences, is a way of challenging power. It's a way of demonstrating, hey, this thing is happening, it's systematic, it's structural, and we have the evidence to prove it. So I'll sort of end there. So these twin principles, examining power, challenging power, in both of these, we want to raise the question of perspective. So data science by whom, mapping by whom, for whom, with whose data, with whose values, and so on. And so if there's one question or provocation that I would put out there to you all today, it's thinking about how do you keep that question of who central to your own investigations in the symposium. So thinking about who are we, who are you, who are the people that are doing this work here today, who's not present, who needs to be here, who is it for, whose values are being mobilized, and so on and so forth. So my short tidbit of advice would be to ask who questions and continue to ask who questions at all stages of the process. So thanks very much, and I wish I could be with you, and I look forward to hearing some of the results that come out of the gathering. Thanks.